This eNCA exclusive. Advocates Dali Mpofu and Tembeka Ngcukaitobi were denied working permits to participate in Zimbabwe's Constitutional Court case challenging last month's presidential poll. Now, the opposition MDC alliance believes the July 30 presidential election were rigged. Nelson Chamisa is seeking to overturn President-elect Emmerson Mnangagwa's win and perhaps force a rerun. Well, the Constitutional Court in Harare will today rule on that particular matter. Well, the two advocates, Dali Mpofu and Tembeka Ngcukaitobi, join me now in studio. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you very much for coming through. I'm not sure who to start with. Perhaps let me start with you, Advocate Ngcukaitobi. Talk to me about why. What were the reasons given to you for refusing you these work permits?
Well, the reasons kept shifting. So originally we were told that we need permission of the Law Society of Zimbabwe. We ultimately got the permission from the Law Society of Zimbabwe. We were then told that we had to submit some certificates, degree certificates, and other documentation from local universities and the local bar. We then complied with that. The ultimate reason, which was communicated to us literally within an hour before the start of the court, was that South Africa is not a reciprocating country with Zimbabwe. In other words, Zimbabwean lawyers are not allowed to work in South Africa, and for that reason, the South African lawyers would also not be allowed to appear in...
Wait, hold on. Is that in fact the case? Because I seem to recall that one of the people who actually used to be a spokesperson for the MDC, his name escapes me now. He practices as a lawyer here in South Africa. Is that true?
Look, there are many Zimbabweans who are practicing law in South Africa. I mean, they obviously have had to go through some kind of process. But the real problem, Claude, is that the minister completely conflates the requirements in Section 7. Under Section 7 of the Legal Practitioners Act of Zimbabwe, if you are a reciprocating country, you have automatic rights of appearance in the Zimbabwean courts. If you are not from a reciprocating country, then the minister has discretion. So he can't use that reason to exclude us. So it seems to us that it was just a convenient excuse to deny us rights of access, which is a bit contradictory, because when our participation was originally announced, the minister said, Ziyambi, Ziyambi, he said you can bring any lawyer, including lawyers from Mars. And then no lawyers from Mars came, lawyers from Johannesburg came, but they were still denied.
Mr. Mpofu, was this whole saga handled politically as opposed to it having been, or as opposed to what should have happened, which was that it ought to have been handled through the courts?
No, absolutely. That's actually the central problem. Firstly, that this was left to the hands of politicians. We, as you might know, we appear in courts around SADC, and this has nothing to do with politicians. It's a matter, at best, between the court and the practitioner, or between the court and the law society of that country. That we were prepared to do. But once you introduce the subjective views of politicians, in this particular case, actually, this is the classical case that demonstrates why you should not have politicians. Because the minister who was now supposed to give us permission, A, was the chief electoral agent of Mnangagwa. B, he personally had filed an affidavit in these proceedings opposing our
We're talking about the Justice Minister.
Yes, the Justice Minister of Zimbabwe. He has filed an affidavit opposing this application. So how do you expect him to now basically give the other side the right to legal counsel? Because that's what it's about. It's not about us. We are professionals. It doesn't matter if they allow us or not, but it's the rights of the litigant to have counsel of his choice. Because irrespective of the outcome of this, whether Chamisa wins or loses the case, the point of the matter remains that he has been now denied the rights of counsel of his choice. And the fact of the matter is that Zimbabwe is, whether it's a reciprocating country or not, I mean, I spoke to the minister, former Minister Chinamasa, who was Minister of Justice outside court, and he was boasting that he's the one who put in this law to restrict appearances. So I said, I thought we were all Pan-Africanists. And he had no answer to that. And I said, so now because of the colonial borders, one Mpofu, Advocate Mpofu from Zimbabwe cannot talk, but the other Advocate Mpofu from South Africa cannot talk. The other one can talk. What is that? And he had no answer to that. So it was clearly meant for this particular case, and it was unfair.
Mr. Ngcukaitobi, so the two of you had to sit in the gallery now as as though you were, members of the public watching that case. In your view, what should Zimbabweans, I think importantly, expect today? There is, of course, this trust deficit in as far as the judiciary in Zimbabwe is concerned. All I'm asking of you is that should Zimbabweans, and of course your clients, expect a fair outcome that is not partisan?
Well, just 2 points about this. Our own experience, having been to Zimbabwe, is that the ordinary people were incredibly pleased that we were willing to join their cause and to be in solidarity with them. When we arrived at the airport, just meeting ordinary people on the streets, they were very, very pleased. In fact, I think there were 3 occasions when we drove through Harare when people were stopping us and greeting us and quite pleased that South Africans were coming. The local lawyers in Zimbabwe were also very happy that there were South African lawyers that were willing.
In fact, we saw some of those pictures of you being picked up from the airport, yes, taking your bags inside the car. Yeah. Exciting moment.
Yeah, I hadn't realized that there were cameras there. And the Law Society, was quite happy to give us permission to practice in Zimbabwe. So the real problem is a political problem. It was the minister who is, as Dali points out, terribly conflicted, who prevented us from appearing. And our participation in court was not limited to observer status. We had worked hand in glove with the Zimbabwean lawyers to build up the case. And so it was still important. In fact, there was a point when Jeremy Gauntlet, who was one of the lawyers, wanted to leave court, and we were asked by the local attorneys to stay, and so that we could help them through with the court case. So there are obviously one of 2 outcomes. The one outcome is that the court case will succeed. The other outcome is that the court case will not succeed.
Well, did you mount a solid argument in there? What was the nub of your case?
Well, if the case is decided on facts and the law, then it seems to me sufficiently solid to pass the threshold of success. The nub of the case is that there were 7 voter irregularities that were identified. They included duplication of polling stations, duplication of votes. The one glaring example is where there are identical results in at least 8 constituencies. 8 times 2, that gives you 16. Identical, where Mnangagwa gets 20 and Chamisa gets 9. And all of the other candidates will get exactly the same number of votes. Multiply that 8 times. And there were also other instances, 20 voting stations where Mnangagwa and Chamisa got exactly the same number of votes, even though there were differences. Now, the expert witness that we had enlisted made the point very clear that it is a statistical improbability that you can have identical votes 8 times. And it is a statistical improbability that you can have identical votes 20 times. So if you take that alone, quite apart from the issues of the scarves, which were probably important for atmosphere, but not decisive for the case, then the case is a very, very solid one.
So in your view, that figure of 50.8 that Mnangagwa initially got has been revised down to 50.6. Who has won this election, in your view?
Yeah. Well, this is part of the problem. What's clear on the facts, even ZAC itself revised its figure 3 times, not 2 times. It revised its figure 3 times. So it's clear that it's not confident about the outcome that it has announced. So even though we don't know who the ultimate winner was, because there was such interference with the process, we at least know that Mr. Mnangagwa was not the winner.
Mr. Mpofu, I'm going to ask you to put on your political hat. I know you're here as a legal eagle, but I'm going to ask you a political question now, and you tell me, if the court in Zimbabwe today upholds or rules in favor of the ZEC, will that particular result or will that court outcome be acceptable, firstly to your clients and also the general public of Zimbabwe?
Yeah, no, that's not a political question. I think that's a very important question. We don't want to deal much with the merits of the case because that's for the court to decide. But you're quite right. The point of the matter is that this case actually has got nothing to do with Chamisa or Mnangagwa or us as the lawyers. This case is about the people of Zimbabwe, which is the nub of your question. If I was Mnangagwa, I would say, look, with a narrow win, which has now been reduced by ZEC itself to 50.6. So it's no longer even 50.8 to 50.6. for legitimacy, because there's a difference between legality and legitimacy. Political legitimacy means the right to be accepted by your population for the next 5 years. For legitimacy, I would have said, please scrutinize this election so that it's very clear that I have won. Don't block lawyers, don't give any shenanigans.
Be transparent as you possibly can.
Be transparent so that even if I've won by 2 votes, it doesn't matter. But at least everyone will know that I'm the legitimate president of Zimbabwe. And the people of Zimbabwe themselves deserve to know that in such a close contest, did the majority really vote this way or that way? And that's important for all of us, for the continent, for SADC, for peace in our region, so that these questions are no longer asked. So this shenanigans actually add to the irony of them invoking Mugabe's law to block lawyers, which Chinamasa was boasting about, for Mnangagwa to remain in power is there. So the so-called new dawn that they say they have there looks like it's also a fake new dawn.
If the court were to announce that there be a rerun, can ZEC be trusted to run a fair and transparent, but more importantly, credible election in Zimbabwe?
Well, again, I don't want to get into the merits. That would depend on if the court, for example, finds that these were clerical errors, the errors that Tembeka was talking about, which was ZEC's point. Remember, ZEC actually conceded that they made mistakes. As we say, they had 3 different results, 50.8, 50.7, and 50.6. So the rhetorical question is, even if this court says it validates the election, which one is it validating? Is it the 50.8, the 50.7, or the 50.6? How would you want to rule a country under those circumstances? It's just untenable.
Mr. Ngcukaitobi, perhaps as we wrap up, you sat there as an observer now in that court. Again, I ask this question. There's a trust deficit. The judiciary in Zimbabwe is not trusted. In your view, as you saw the arguments unfold, what was your sense of the actual justices that sat in front of you, in the manner in which they posed questions? And I'm asking a question that an ordinary citizen, whether it be of this country or Zimbabwe, would have wanted to see, because unfortunately we didn't even see it live, although it was said to be televised.
I didn't realize that. 3 cameras on television, but it was not live. No, look, we have to work on the assumption everywhere, including in South Africa. You work on the assumption, you presume the independence of judges until they prove themselves otherwise. So the same benefit of doubt must be given to the judges of Zimbabwe, that they will uphold the oath of office, which is based on the idea of judging each case by reference to the facts and the law. So until they prove themselves otherwise, we have to presume their independence and presume their fidelity to their oath of office.
Mr. Mpofu, finally, again I ask you to put on your political hat. Should today we expect a result that favors the ZEC and, of course, legitimizing Mr. Mnangagwa's winning or victory in this election? And if so, will that come as a surprise?
No, it will not come as a surprise. I mean, if one observed what went on in court. But the point...
What do you mean by that? I mean, that's a very loaded statement.
No. The point we are really making here is that irrespective of the results, in fact, the best way to understand what we are talking about is assume Chamisa wins. If Chamisa wins, the point of the matter is that the reason we're here is to say, even if he wins, he was denied a fundamental right of human beings to be represented in court by counsel of their choice. And that South African government, we have made an appeal to our law bodies in South Africa to take this matter up. We are going to make an appeal to the South African government to take it up. And SADC, because I'm sure you've attended SADC meetings. The buzzword in SADC meetings is regional integration, regional integration. How can you have regional integration if you are going to disallow people from practicing? How can you have regional integration if you're going to talk about permits when Zimbabweans are here and now you want to introduce almost a xenophobic legal practitioners appearance regime? We can't do that. We are one, particularly in this region. And it's very important that the politicians must wake up to this and not look at it as a matter of this particular case or of Tembeka and I and Jeremy Gauntlet and so on, but as a broader issue of regional integration and whether or not, I mean, half of the lawyers in Zimbabwe qualified in South African universities. They get here, they go to Rhodes, they go to Wits, and they go back, which is good. But how do you then discriminate between us and them? The people that we were sitting with on the same desk, and now suddenly you're going to invoke the very borders that we say should be undermined. I mean, that's the travesty of justice here. It's very important. It goes beyond the merits of this case.
Gentlemen, I'm going to thank the both of you. In fact, I've now remembered the person that practices here as a lawyer in South Africa, Ngcukaitobi. I think he was part of
course, yeah.
I know him to be a Zimbabwean and he practices law in this country.
Yes, you're quite right.
We are out of time, unfortunately. I'm going to ask the two of you to remain there for the time being.